Pregnancy is a natural process, so if it's not happening or if it's not sticking, something is missing. After having a family member go through infertility and experiencing a miscarriage myself, I realized how little support and education women have around infertility. I want to change that. I'm Dr. Jane Levesque. I'm a naturopathic doctor and a natural fertility expert. Tune in every Tuesday at 9 a.m. for insightful case studies, expert interviews, and practical tips on how you can optimize fertility naturally. If you've been struggling with infertility, pregnancy loss, women's health issues, or you just want to be proactive and prepare yourself for the next big chapter in your life, this show is for you.
Hi, Gabe. Thanks so much for being here. I'm really excited to introduce you to my community. We met at ECO, and I was just in awe in the work that you're doing and how you got here. So thank you so much for being here.
Jane, it was absolutely a pleasure meeting you at ECO and getting to know you, and thanks for having me here today. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to work with you as well. We had our first appointment yesterday, and I know it's just the beginning, and I see a lot of need for this work. So tell us, how does one go from being a chiropractor? And I know that you have a whole list of other credentials, but how do you go from being a chiropractor to becoming a subconscious healer? And we're going to dive into more what that actually means, but just if you can give us a little bit of your journey and how you got here.
First off, I became a chiropractor because I did a little research on the healing arts, and it was the one that resonated with me the most because the claim to fame was it uses the body's own healing abilities to heal itself. And
Yes.
that at that time, I was a former Marine. I was a paramedic in the back of ambulances. And I was also a personal trainer, and I had started to see the benefits of nutrition and exercise and things like that. But there was still a lot going on, and from my own childhood experiences, I had a lot of trauma going on. There was addictions. I mean, I found myself smoking pot all the time just for relief and helping me sleep and things like that. But I was wanting to journey into the healing arts to learn more about how to help myself, and obviously, I liked helping people, and that really came through as working as a paramedic and an EMT and things like that. So I worked in a hospital for maybe a year and a half in emergency situations, and really enjoyed stepping into places like that were just chaotic and helping people through those times.
Mm-hmm.
So I met a friend that was an old high school friend, and he was a successful chiropractor. He's the one that really introduced me to what chiropractic was. It made sense to me on some levels. So I decided right then and there that's what I was going to do. And a lot of it was for trying to heal this internal pain I had my whole life.
Sure.
I couldn't put my thumb on it, but there was something inside of me that I just didn't like. And so I went through chiropractic college, successfully went through that. Then I started getting into being mentored by energy medicine and muscle testers, and became a best practitioner pretty quick out of school, acupuncture. And I was doing all these different things to myself and having other practitioners practice on me. And I could notice it was making some dents in that internal pain. And nothing I had learned in chiropractic school had ever even touched on that. There was not one breath of why that discomfort was there.
And was it just like a visceral pain, or would you actually have like digestive issues or like shoulder pain? Do you know?
Right. So to the body, pain is pain. So
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if it's physical pain or emotional pain. Mine was purely emotional pain. At the time, I didn't have any. There'd be digestive upsets once in a while, and headaches and tension and things like that, but nothing that I could really describe as like a chronic pain that you would see people having.
Were you aware at the time that was emotional pain versus physical pain, or did you think it was physical pain and you didn't know it was masked as that?
At the time, I was at the level of my understanding myself and conscious that I just purely wasn't even aware of what it was. I just knew that there was, in fact, Jane, here's an example of I knew something was wrong, but I wasn't sure what it was. Whenever I joined the Marine Corps, there was a specific unit that I applied to get into, and it was a more elite unit. It wasn't just your typical Marines. It was a more elite of the elite. And there was interviews and things like that to get in
Yep.
to this. And at one point they asked me in this really intense interview, why is it, should we let you in here? This is decorated Marines, what is
Yep.
it that makes you a candidate for even joining this place? And I remember I had some squad leaders next to me that were watching, and they were rooting for me getting in. And I said the first thing that came out of my mouth, I wasn't even thinking. I just said, I'm looking for a way to deal with my pain. And I saw them kind of go, ooh, like, oh, there could have been better answers, but they let me in.
Because
So I was at that
I bet
point,
you weren't the only one. You maybe
right.
were the only one that's truthful to say that, but
And I think that's a very accurate answer.
yeah.
But many of them there, same kind of thing. And so it was a calling looking for this, and it led me to chiropractic school years and years later. So I knew there was something underlying. There was a pain that was there. And I went through all these different healing arts to figure out. And then I started realizing that as a chiropractor, I was working on people's physical pain. But as I got to know them a little more, I spent time with them and I listened to them, and I would ask, questions instead of just rushing them through, which was kind of the model that was getting
Sure.
thrown at us. I found out that a lot of them had emotional pain as well. So then I started to see that, hey, I started digging into some journals, and I started looking at the neuroscience, and I found a striking thing that came to my awareness that I had never learned in 8 years worth of chiropractic school. And that was that physical pain and emotional pain show up on the brain the same way. In other words, if you were to be rejected, particularly as a child, because most people don't realize the most influential, most important memories we have that form the lens of how we live our dynamics of our life are formed between conception and 5 years old. By that time, it's a template set in place. But if a child feels emotionally rejected during those times, it will show up as physical pain identical to if they stepped on a red hot coal or if they were stuck in the back with a nail. And when I really started to see that, I realized that I was doing surface level work with my patients and
Yeah.
on all the adjustments. Yes, they would improve. Yes, they would feel better. There'd be that little pop that everyone likes in the back that's like, oh man, that's the spot, and then 2 weeks later it's right back again. And I personally didn't like that model. I wanted something a little deeper. And as I started studying emotional stuff, I noticed that a lot of the healing arts left the mental emotional side out. And then I started studying quantum physics, and I realized that it's the mental emotional that's the causative. Because a person can eat right and they can do all the right things on the surface. But if there's a lot of turmoil going on inside of their emotions, and if they're intensely involved in thinking of the wrong ideas, and if they aren't having a personal responsibility for themselves, then everything else is surface level too. So all the things that I had studied to look for healing, I realized that I had completely left the mental emotional part of it out. So then I really went in depth in that and started studying some of the resources that I looked at that really brought this into awareness were documents from the CIA and the United States Army, where they had put a tremendous amount of intention studying human consciousness and what it was and how it works through holograms. And to access fragments of a hologram, you can change the whole picture. So it's an advantage of changing something little and getting a big shift out of it. And when I started applying this to myself, I noticed that pain started to disappear, and I noticed that my body felt physically better. Even though I wasn't having real complaints, I just noticed that everything felt looser. There was not any tension. I slept deeper than I'd ever slept. And then I started applying this to my patients, and it was a game changer. I noticed that instead of having a routine amount of patients that I would just keep on maintenance, I would have patients come and go and come and go and come and go, and they would improve so much that they would always be referring back. And I knew that I had hit something big. And at the time, I was making, $150,000 a year in supplements, and I let all that go because I
Sure.
knew that I watched the people as they improved emotionally. they didn't need that stuff anymore. They didn't muscle test for it. Their body improved so much to where, is it helpful to take those? Absolutely. Is it key to using, 20 and 30 and 40 a day? Not necessarily, right? There are times when it has its place. There are people that
Sure.
I've had patients come into me and they have infections going on and they have
Sure.
swelling and redness and infections going on, and it's a definite sign that you need something to get those under control. And herbs and medication, I've even studied the difference in how the difference between those work. Herbal medicine is really powerful and very helpful. But if we're relying on these as a tool constantly and ignoring the mental emotional side of ourselves, then we are essentially treating things at surface level. And
I mean, I always say this to my patients the way, and one of the reasons I like Cellcore is because they have a lot of frequency that they put into the supplements as well. But I see it as a way to bring people to the place where, hey, we're going to have to deal with some of this mental and emotional stuff. And I wanted to ask you, why do we have such resistance to work with it? And I think to work with some of our mental emotionals, repressed emotions, what does that even really mean? And what is this subconscious? How it's going to cause disease? I think there's lack of awareness or lack of understanding of what it really is. And so there's comprehension and there's fear. But I find I always draw the 3 circles: physical, mental, and emotional. They're all intertwined. And
right,
the mental and emotional expresses what's going on in the physical body. And so we can support the physical body, whether it's your liver that's clogged or your gallbladder or your kidneys or your digestion. But once that's through, in order to prevent it from being clogged, we have to figure out what was causing. Usually there is emotional things that come up, especially if you're doing some heavy detoxing.
right. So out of those 3 circles, uh, and just my understanding of quantum physics, I would say that the mental emotional is the causative. And even on a deeper level than that, what is the subconscious mind? Well, first off, we have to understand there's 2 levels of the mind. There's the conscious mind and there's the subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind has many different names and references. We can call it the unconscious. We can call it the superconscious. The Greeks understood this. It's been known for 50,000 different books older than the pyramids about this power that lies within us that does the work. It's referenced many times throughout biblical teachings and things like that. In fact, there's a book called The Gospel of Thomas, a part of the Bible that was removed during Constantine's era. And Jesus Christ says this about the subconscious mind. He says, when you make the 2 into 1, you can say to the mountain, move mountain, and the mountain will move. It's so important. He says it a few different times. He says, when you make the 2 into 1, you can say to the mountain, move mountain, and the mountain will move. What does he mean by 2 into 1? Conscious, subconscious, thought, and emotion. Because our conscious mind that we're aware of, that most people are operating from, and they think that it's in charge, and it is a power-hungry part of us. Don't get me wrong. It's a part that is very convincing. It tells us the voice in our head, and oftentimes will create rational reasons for why things are the way they are that make sense to us, that give us an understanding that we or why things are the way they are, why we have these symptoms, why things maybe are messed up. That sounds so convincing that we go with it, but they're so detached from the truth that we don't look deeper. We don't understand the deeper parts of us that are hidden below the surface, that are in our blind spots. So he said that, and he also said, when you make peace in the house, you can say to the mountain, move mountain, and the mountain will move. Well, what's our house? Our vessel, right?
For sure, yep.
And then there's another part that in the Bible that says, ask, believe, receive. So that part is still in the King James Version, and it says ask, believe, receive. It doesn't say ask, figure it out. It says ask, believe, receive. So many people are afraid to ask because deep down they've had perceptions built into them through our society where they're not deserving, if they weren't seen for who they are. So it doesn't necessarily mean, whenever I say childhood trauma, I don't necessarily mean just you were physically abused or emotionally abused. I mean you weren't seen for who you are. And that kind of trauma is global. Parents are so occupied, and I'm definitely in that boat. Even though I'm an expert in this, that does not mean my kids were not traumatized. I learned a little too late. I learned it too little too late. That doesn't mean I don't have connection with them and I'm on the process of healing myself and helping them, understand themselves better and heal from this. But I did not give them what they needed. That was reassurance for who they were. I did not praise them for who they were uniquely from the moment they were born till 3 years old. And that's what happens in small pockets of Aboriginal and tribal areas. They're so welcomed that when they grow up, they're an adult that is fully grounded in who they are. They're fully secure with who they are. They don't have this concept, this idea that I'm not deserving or I'm not lovable or I'm not a valuable person, which is very common in our culture. So that is
And one of
part
the
of
things
it.
you do you told me that at dinner time is like they'll look at their babies and they look their babies in their eyes like
Right.
constantly.
Yes, nonstop for weeks and months. And what that does is it builds endorphin receptors, so
Hmm.
pain-killing receptors. That to a baby is exactly what is required, just as much as, breast milk and clean air and a nice warm facilities to sleep in and things like that. A baby comes out of the mom, that's also a vital necessity for proper brain development. And that is just to be welcomed. And how does a baby feel welcomed when it's not able to speak or anything? Is the mother looks at it in the eyes, and the baby looks at the mom in the eyes, and that creates painkillers in both the baby and the mom. And it stimulates brain development in such a way that if a mother could do that to her child for months and months on end, that child grows into a teenager, that grows into a young adult, that grows into an adult, able to cope with life, that has very tranquilizing hormones, neurotransmitters, brain chemicals produced in ample amounts to where they're able to handle life appropriately. And one thing I see is anxiety is the largest growing condition in North America, right?
Yeah, it's huge.
And a lot of us contribute it to everything from blood sugar to stealth infections and everything else. But what we're not realizing is the stress level in our society spills over and impacts all of us at an energetic level, and the babies pick up on that too. And the babies pick up on it because we're so detached from our children, especially our newborn infants, and it's been conditioned into us. Nobody's really approaching it from this side of, hey, we need to shift everything. The minute a baby's born, we need to have attention for that. The mother needs to kind of unplug from everything for a moment. The mother really needs to unplug from everything for a moment and just be able to give that baby presence being known, because that's what'll affect the brain circuits long term. Now, the good news is those brain circuits can always be regrown later.
Of course,
Okay.
yeah.
So,
Well, what I was
it's
going to
not all
say
bad
is,
news.
no, it's not. I mean, I think we need to understand the bad news so we can really see why things are happening. Like, I'm all about zooming out and instead of throwing a random statistic like, oh, 1 in 6 people are now struggling with infertility. So I guess we need to have more options to have
Or IVF, right?
That's it, more fertility care, which is IVF. And it's like, yeah, but why don't we just look at what's happening? There's a lot more women who don't want to, when you say women are detached from the baby, the moms are, I would even say that we're detached from our bodies. So then when we have the baby, we don't really know how to connect because we haven't done the work ourselves. That was my experience the first time. And it's not that I haven't done the work. I just think there's always work to be done. But I just think it's such a big event in a woman's life that it will show you any quote unquote holes that you have. Because I thought that I was healthy. I thought that until I had this baby and I was like, oh my God, I don't, I have no idea what I'm doing and I don't know how to connect to her. I don't know. But now looking back on it is like, oh, it's because I had things that was missing for me. It had nothing to do with a baby. But then obviously we just pass it on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We just pass on our wounds without knowing it, and
Yeah.
many, if we can. And you mentioned doing the work. We can do a lot of work on ourselves, but if we don't understand at a very deep level what that means, then we could be putting in a tremendous amount of work for little payoff. which is one thing that I was wanting to, in my endeavor, I wanted to know what's something I can do that gives my patients as well as myself, as well as my family, what's something I can do that's small that has a tremendous payoff that, it's a big shift with, because that's what we need. I mean, we live in a fast moving society and everyone wants it now, now, now. And if it's a tremendous amount of work, most people will give up. And that was kind of leading to one of your questions of why do we resist this? Okay. First off, let me just say the subconscious mind, if we have a conscious awareness and then there's a part of us that we're not aware of. And that subconscious mind does not use any words. It does not communicate with words in our head. And it's the part of us that records everything from the moment we're conceived until now. And it just records it flawlessly. All this data is flowing
So
through
the
us.
moment you're conceived, not the moment you're born, just to make sure that people caught that. The moment you're
Tremendous,
conceived, yeah.
tremendous amount. And whenever it comes to what I find that is uneasy for many people, many doctors, many professionals, whenever I talk about this with them, until they experience it themselves. Last week, I sat down with a doctor through Zoom who is probably one of the best doctors in the country. When I mentioned Mark Hyman and Paul Chek, they've hired this man, and he came to me for just reoccurring pain. And we ended up going through several different memories until we were in the womb. Okay, we were in the womb is where one of these first memories started. And he had what's called a self-mutilation program. Now, self-mutilation programs have nothing to do with what the person consciously is aware of, and it has nothing to do with what they are intending for their life. But remember, at conception, at the moment of conception is when we absolutely learn the most. I think when the sperm and egg unite, and that little flash, if you've ever studied embryology, it's fascinating. There's like a flash of light that they can measure, and it actually kills all the other sperm that are on the egg. Once the one sperm gets in, boom, it just kills all
Get
the
out
other
of here.
sperm.
Yeah, you're done.
Get out of here. You're done. I won. I'm the winner. I hit the
She
checkered
picked
flag,
me.
right? She picked me. And that flash of light's fascinating because I think that's when we learn the most. And that's when we absolutely learn our play. And this doesn't make sense from an academic standpoint the way doctors learn today. They don't even understand this at all. And I did not until I got really heavy into this work. And I would take people back to the very first moment of where their anxiety, where their distrust of life, where their chronic pain came from. And they're literally in the womb. And I'm just asking questions and they're reciting back exactly what came into their awareness. And they're listening to either the parents argue about the pregnancy being a mistake. The mom is sitting there very regretful. Maybe she had a baby out of wedlock and suddenly she's completely scared of what her family's going to think, what her father's going to think, all these different things, and thinking the baby's a mistake. And when that fetus is growing inside of her and yet so new and fresh and absorbent, well, that data goes in, and if she decides to have the baby starts to develop, and there's already a perception built at the foundation, and that foundation is, I'm not supposed to be here, or the people that I care about most, mom and dad, would be better off if I wasn't here. I'm not worth it. I'm not lovable. I shouldn't be here. And that becomes a foundation of what forms their subconscious mind. The subconscious mind has many characteristics, but I want to share two that are really important for people to understand. The foundation is built from between conception and 5. We covered that. It's the most powerful goal-achieving agency known to humanity, and its powers are absolutely limitless in what it can do. People that have, in the Bible, it talks about people that were in harmony with their subconscious mind could survive furnaces. They could escape the mouths of lions. These are tales showing us about this power within us. How could somebody be thrown into a cave with hungry lions and lions don't even eat them? Something about that person, right? It's giving us clues about this power within us.
I mean, to bring it back to like a regular example, we talked about that. Why do some people get bites with ticks and they don't get Lyme while others can't seem to shake it off for years?
There's a self-mutilation program at work. What
Yeah.
that means is the subconscious mind is the most powerful goal-achieving agency known to humanity, and it cannot judge a single decision put in it. It's almost like a fertile garden with soil. It doesn't matter what you put in it. You could grow beets, you could grow beautiful roses, or you could grow poison ivy and poison oak. The dirt does not care. It's akin to that. And in that moment of conception, we're like a fertile ground that whatever seeds get planted blossom into symptoms as we age, blossom into perceptions that get stronger and stronger. So why would the same thing can happen with food poisoning, by the way. I have witnessed many times where I've not only seen it myself, but clients through the years of they're sitting down eating the same meal with the same crowd of people at the same table, and yet one person gets really bad food poisoning or 3 get food poisoning and 4 of them don't. It has to do with where their subconscious mind is reaching critical mass. What that means is there's a part of you that says, I don't deserve to be here, or I shouldn't be here, or something like that. And depending on it's ebbs and flows. And what that means is every experience we have in life matches either perceptions we have or it doesn't match. And if there's a self-mutilation program running in their subconscious mind that was formed early, as they go through life, if more life experiences match that, have a harmony to that self-mutilation, every experience that comes into life, it starts to build. Let me give you an example. If early on an infant gets the idea that mom is too stressed out, that she can't handle the infant, and it's too much, the self-worth of the infant starts to mutate quickly. And let's say this infant grows into a little boy, and he gets a little older, and now he's a preteen. So let's say this little infant who got the perception early that mom didn't want him, it's too stressful, life's too stressful, but yet he survives and he's able to eat meals and do all the other things. And now he's a 12-year-old boy at school, and he's in an opportunity where they're playing dodgeball or something. Yet he's the last to get picked. Like everyone picks a team, and he's standing there by himself, the last to get picked. Well, we've all felt that. We've all been there, and we've had that experience to where we're kind of the last to get picked on the team. And it feels uncomfortable. There's like an uncomfortable feeling. Well, to the subconscious mind, it takes that experience and adds it to that perception that's already there, that I'm not good enough, I'm not wanted. And just from not getting picked on a team, it adds a little bit more weight to that perception that's already there. Now, we're saying this about a 12-year-old kid at a dodgeball, playing dodgeball or getting picked on a team last. Well, as those life experiences come and go, and they add more and more and more weight to that perception, there's a time in our life, usually around the age of 35 to 45, when we've had enough experiences build up. It's been reinforced enough. That perception has been reinforced enough to where the mass gets so large, it's like the old adage of the camel the straw that breaks the camel's back. You add one more insignificant event by itself, and suddenly it's like the scale tips, and the enthusiasm the subconscious mind has for achieving that goal suddenly rises. And the subconscious mind says, we aren't supposed to be here. We're not supposed to exist. We aren't good enough. We're not a worthy, valuable person, whatever it is. And immediately it'll take anything in the environment, whether you're eating at a table and there's an opportunistic bacteria there, where somebody next door that's sitting at the same table feels life-giving. They have perceptions of, life is here to support me. I love my life. I love being who I am. And they really feel it at a deep level. Well, they could eat the same meal. One gets sick, one doesn't. They could be bitten by a tick. One gets sick, one doesn't. All those opportunities are there. The subconscious mind is so opportunistic. It will seek anything in the environment, to make that come into a reality. And if it can't seek it in the environment, it can do it to itself through confusion of the autoimmune, through what are called autoimmune conditions, when the immune system seems to be just confused. It's attacking itself,
Yeah.
And are there other factors involved? Certainly, but none of them are more powerful than a subconscious mind working either for you or against you based on these early perceptions, and then getting reinforced through life's experiences. On that note, you could have a self-mutilation program installed as an infant, but then you start let's say your parent, uh, and I want to be clear because I know I have a lot of women listening, and I do not want to strike horror in them because we've all been there. I heard Bruce Lipton say that around 75% of people would fail a muscle test for loving themselves, right? If you had a big crowd of 75 people, or 100
100
people,
people.
75 of them would not pass a test for loving themselves at a very deep level. They might say it on the surface, but deep down, their subconscious didn't get that memo, right? And I would say it has to do with what happened to them early on, every time. But I want to be clear on something for any listeners that might be hearing this and going, "Oh my gosh, does that always mean that if a mother feel scared or frightened or maybe even regretful that suddenly she's pregnant, that the child is doomed?" Absolutely not. Okay? Because it's perceptions that gain momentum that will eventually spill over into pathology. So let's say a mother and a father were love-starved themselves. They didn't know what to do. They have a child and suddenly they're like, "Oh my gosh, this is a bad mistake. Maybe we should have an abortion." And they come to their senses and say, "You know what? No, we're not going to do that. We're going to step up and we're going to be responsible for this child and we're going to love this child." The child could have an early perception of it's a mistake, but the parents step up and start to build a new perception of, "Hey, I love you. I welcome you. Let's go to the park, have fun. Good job on that. You hit the baseball, you did all these things. Good job on that." You can start to build perceptions with children and reinforce those. And that doesn't mean these early ones necessarily will bloom into disease. That's what I see in my work, but it also means that we can build new perceptions and reinforce those. So I want to
It's
be
just
clear
like the seeds, right? It's like the seeds that you're going to give attention to, because you can plant lots of different seeds in the soil, but if you give attention to the sunflower and the lilies and the daisies versus the poison ivy, I think I'm glad that you said that, because we live in this world now, even hearing you speak, it's like, "Oh my God, I did this. And then but I also have this programming, or at least this understanding of life, where it's like, you know what? I did the best that I could with the information that I knew. And my intention with my children, even if I'm quote unquote yelling at them or I've lost my temper, is still out of love. And this was a really good example when my husband and I ran our CrossFit gym, and he had a woman come, and I think she was somewhere in South Africa, but essentially the way that they raised their kids, if the kids went away from their parameter of quote unquote safety, the kid would get smacked. And then the kid would know that, oh, I have to stay close to mom. And then when she moved to Canada, she was like, "Oh, I guess I can't do that here because it's not appropriate." But here we would say that, oh, that's trauma. But if you look at the purpose of why she was doing that there, is because, well, that's how I keep my kid close to me, and that's how I'm actually looking out for him or her to keep them safe, so they don't get, they don't run away, they go kidnapped, they don't get hurt, whatever. And I just thought, well, that's interesting, because I'm sure that that kid it's not programmed as trauma. When my mom gives me a little smack, it programs, oh, my mom loves me and cares for me, so I need to stay close. And so the perception or the intention behind the action really matters. And like, you can change that whenever,
Right.
right? Like, better late than never. It's sure best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago, but the next best time is now.
I mean, that's exactly right. And I would say this, just because when a child is born, they have a necessity to be loved, like we kind of talked about, staring in
Yep,
the
sure.
baby's eyes. And I will say this, though, that necessity to be loved is not always met just because the parent loved the child. And I would say that oftentimes, even smacking, see, the child might, they'll interpret it completely different than what the parent intended to sometimes. Because see, Dr.
Totally,
Gabor
yep.
Mate, and we've talked about Dr. Gabor Mate, he says this, he says, trauma is not what happened to you, it's happened what's inside of you as a result of that.
Yes.
So what does that mean? What does that mean exactly? It means that it's not the event that occurs that's the traumatizing event, like a child getting smacked, okay? But it's the meaning that the child gives that smack deep down. How are they interpreting it? yes, the parent is saying, you can't go far, you can't do this, you may get kidnapped or eaten by a wild animal or something. But to a child, a parent hitting them, and that's how they see it. They see it as the parent hits them, and it can build a perception that is, you know, very traumatizing. And what I mean by traumatizing is a trauma is a wound that persists for a period of time, and it acts in a few different ways. One of them is a holographic geometrical shape of light. That means it acts like a hologram. It has billions of fragments of light. When one fragment goes active from a random thought, we have thought patterns. We go in and out of trance states 15 to 50 times an hour. So 15 to 50 times an hour, our mind is taking trips here and there. We're driving down the road and our mind is all over the place. So we're naturally going in and out of these trance states and visiting old memories. So we can naturally access a fragment of it through our normal trance in and out state, or a random smell, taste, or touch. A song perhaps, hearing something can activate one of those fragments and they go active. And suddenly we're feeling that pain, we're feeling that tension. We are capable of having an entire traumatic event get restored down into our body somewhere, and it's stored in a group of neurons. That's why a lot of times people store trauma in their heart, they store it in their gut. But you can store memory anywhere in the entire body. You can store it anywhere in the body. I've had people store memory in an eyelash before. As funny as that may be, a trichotillomania, just constantly doing that. And I said, there's a place that starts, a place that originates, where all this came from, first impression. Where to feel that? She went right to her fingertips and right to her eyelashes. And there was memory stored in both of those that caused her to do that. And, this woman had done everything else before then, but just not access that memory and change it. So this becomes the lump in your throat. This becomes the tightness, tension. This becomes the vice in your head when suddenly somebody's coming to visit that you were really your mother-in-law perhaps, or you have to give a presentation, or you have a certain patient coming to see you, a certain client coming to see you, and you know that she's always kind of a mess and she'll be complaining to you. And the minute you know she's on the schedule and you see her, there's some uneasiness somewhere getting triggered inside you. That's memory. That's a holographic geometric shape going active. And although you're not aware of it, your brainwave state goes active as the exact same moment of encoding. It's identical to the moment of encoding, and your physiological state changes as well. Your fight or flight goes active.
And that's the thing that we can become aware of, is the physiological state.
That's the thing that we can become consciously aware of. Is suddenly our state changes, and we know that there's something about that. There's something, and we'll oftentimes call that a trigger. They triggered me, or this triggered me, or something else. And what it did was it activated that wound. And the good news is those wounds can be completely healed. Now, I've talked to many therapists and many people over the years, and they say certain levels of trauma can't be healed. And I'm sure there maybe are.
You haven't come across them yet, though.
I work with techniques that are so powerful that no matter what it is you're bringing, we're at least going to make big dents in it. Okay, we're going to at least make big dents in it. But I've worked with people that have been dedicated and worked with me for over a year and a half at a time, and they are completely different people.
Sure.
Let me give you an example, because sometimes people say, well, how long does this take? And, how many treatments do I need?
And Nettie, I mean, I have that question, but I think the question before that, when you say you're going to go in there and you're going to clear it up, the question is always like, where are you actually going in, and how are you actually clearing? Like, what are you clearing? That's the more tangible. And then, like, how long does it take? Because I wrote that as my questions before, because we always talk about going in there and it's like, where are we going?
Right. Where are we going and where are we headed to?
Yeah.
And is it going to be a fun journey? So many people can resist this. And that was one of your first questions, is because we're neurologically wired to resist pain and move towards pleasure. And if we know that there's something that's happened to us and we're not sure what, but there's like a pain, like me, like I carried that pain for a long time. I had what's called ruthless determination. I wanted to change. And there was a time in my life when at level 1, I realized I thought there was just one mind that I was aware of, and that world was happening to me, life was happening to me. And then I was introduced to
And you had zero control of it.
Zero control, right. Life just happens, it's mechanical. It's predictable, and sometimes you're just dealt those cards, and that's what you deal with it, right? So that's a certain level of consciousness. Then I was introduced to one of my first mentors who talked about the subconscious, and many people may talk about the subconscious, and they can do it intelligently, but in my experience, very few have actually learned how to make it work for them. There's a huge difference. Okay. Well, this was a mentor who could talk about it. He couldn't show me how to fix it, but he gave me the understanding that my internal pain was from something that happened to me, and it was in fact causing more painful experiences to come into my life. So
It's like that like attracts like.
exactly, he gave me an awareness that there was an internal part of me that was creating and recreating the external forces around me, and that was the awareness I needed. Then I started looking for how do I change the inside? How do I go deeper than he could show me? That was an awareness that there was something in me creating this, right? And for me, going into those painful moments was sometimes hard to do. I realized that you could anchor people into safety. So I think one of the questions that comes up oftentimes is, what if you know there's been horrible trauma and that, or trauma back, and I don't want to go face it. I want to fix these things, but man, when you say 0 to 5, oh, I just know my child was a mess. My dad was a drunk. There was a lot of abuse, things like that. And I just don't want to go back and visit that. Okay. I just don't want to go there. Right. That can be understandable. This work, trauma happens in a millisecond. It's not the entire memory. There's a single emotional spike to where we feel neurologically overwhelmed, and it takes a millisecond before this emotional spike goes up, and before it hits the threshold maximum our nervous system can handle before we die, before it hits that, a protective mechanism kicks in, shuts the whole thing off, and stores it as a pocket of consciousness. And that's what a wound is. That's what trauma is. So if trauma is only a millisecond, if we're only overwhelmed for a millisecond, how much courage do I need from you to step in there and fix it? 1 millisecond. Additionally, I anchor people into safety. So I have them all blissed out to where their subconscious is in a very nice state of comfort and bliss, whether it's a place that they could come up with on their own or a place they've actually visited before that's made them feel safe.
And that's just like a meditation that you take people to.
That is where I use some hypnotic anchoring, okay, and get their mind and their body, their subconscious, into a full state of bliss and peace before we go kick the hornet nest and find out where we need to go. And I do that with everyone because I never know. I could have a professional sitting here that looks like you'd never expect childhood trauma. There's never any trauma in my life. Gabe, everything was fine. And suddenly we take her back to a moment that's very painful. And if I had not anchored her in safety, it would have been even worse.
For sure.
So a lot of the old school techniques that I've studied on this that are difficult to come by because the old school regression for healing people was around before the internet. So the best you're going to find is footnotes here and there that might or might not make sense. And these were very traumatic for both the therapist and the person, but they could take you back to that initial thing and basically desensitize you. Since then, the things that we're doing today have evolved so much to where it's not traumatizing. You can go back, find that moment, and recode it. So the question about where were we going? Where are we going back to? Are we stepping in? What are we doing?
You're relaxing the body. You're relaxing the body so you can create a nice safe space first.
Right. Relaxing the body. And then I'm cueing you with certain questions. I'm letting your mind take us where we need to go. And what's really cool about this is that you don't have to share everything. This is the most least invasive and least information absorbing process. So I'm going to ask certain questions, but what's nice is that I always tell people, you don't have to share anything you don't want to share. It all takes place in the privacy of your own mind. But I have to ask you certain questions to find that millisecond of overwhelm. When that encoding happens, when we get there, then what we do is we recreate something new, because there's an absolute truth and then there's relative truth. And one of the absolute truths of this universe is that all space is creative space. This is what quantum physics teaches us. All space within our atoms, all space between you and I right now all space is filled with creative energy. That's an absolute truth one. It's amenable to suggestion. That's an absolute truth two. That means the entire atmosphere of our cosmos, its nature is responsiveness. Responsiveness to man, responsiveness to thought. That's how powerful we are. Responsiveness to thought. So it's all space is creative. It's amenable to suggestion. That means it's responsive, but it works in a totally deductive manner. That's an absolute truth number three. That means it works in a positive and a negative way. So if there's a negative holographic imprint from something that is stored within your body or in your energy field that is impressing on you, that causes symptoms, that is making you produce feelings that you don't like when certain circumstances come on. Forget the emotions and the dialogue that kicks in your head and the story you tell yourself. That's all downstream of this body feeling whenever something happens. Everything in the human experience is governed by body feelings. Feelings we want more of or feelings we want a whole lot less of.
Totally.
Period. That's out of all the certifications on energy work and healing people and multiple degrees, that's the most important line I can tell you. Body feelings indicate everything. So when something happens and you get a body feeling, that's that wound going active. A feeling you don't like. I want to be specific. A feeling you don't like. So if we could step into that by accessing that information and having you go to the seed planting of when it first happened, anchored in safety, and then you can find a moment where it was overwhelming for you and you're basically just describing what you're sensing, not what you're seeing, but what you're sensing. And suddenly it comes so aware to you that you're there. We find a millisecond of overwhelm, and then what we do is we establish safety right then and there. So I have you establish safety before we go in, and once you're in there, I have you bring that safety frequency into there and just coat the whole area. Give it to your mom, give it to whoever you want. If your siblings are there and they're getting overwhelmed too, if there's something abusive going on, you just give it to that entire memory, and it immediately decompresses everything. And then I have the person create something that they would rather have instead.
Yes.
And I say, so what would you rather have instead? And the moment I say instead, your mind being a quantum creator, being a person who can collapse particles, take waveform information and collapse it into physical particles. The minute I say instead, your mind bridges you to a possibility, and I have you breathe life into that possibility, amplify it, and we turn that into a feeling, we turn that into a frequency. When we turn that into a frequency, we use that frequency to cancel out all the fragments of that other frequency that was there responsible for the body feeling.
Yep.
So it's basically it's all based on neuroscience and quantum physics. Some people have said, well, I've done inner child work, or I've done hypnosis before, or I've done ayahuasca. This is similar, but much more precise and much more in depth, because when they're breathing that frequency, the new frequency, through the old one, I'm having them watch it disappear. They're literally watching that old wound disappear, and as it fades away, then I can ask them, open your eyes, see how you feel, because it's a very light trance work. They're not like out. What's cool about this is such a light trance that you could be doing this with me, and your phone could ring and you could look at it and say, well, who's this calling me? Let me turn this off real quick. And you'd be able to get right back into that hologram like that. You'd be able to go right back into it.
Yeah, it sounds like you're just really guiding people and help.
Yes.
Yeah, the seed, what you said about the soil, because then we're basically ripping out the weed, and you're doing it pretty quickly because it's only a millisecond, but then you have to make sure that all the roots are out, and then you have to patch up where the hole was, where the weed is, and maybe even stir up the soil a bit. And that's what it sounds right. Am I getting that right?
Yes, you're metaphorically describing it correctly by ensuring that, and our brains do that. Our brains interpret things metaphorically and symbolically, which is
it just
good.
helps. Like, this is how I process it, right? I'm like, okay, if we're using the garden, and I use that a lot for fertility, because I think about, you're not just going to throw a seed on the side of the road and hope that a flower blossoms. Like, we got to prepare the soil, and we got to pull the weeds out, and there's the physical, but there's the mental and emotional, which actually drives a lot of the stuff that happens in the physical body as well.
Right, because I love your description of fertility as, hey, it's just a description of you. If you're infertile, it's not just that's just not something we need to focus on. We need to focus on everything about your overall health, because that's just giving us a glimpse of what's going on. If there's dysfunction there,
There's probably
it's
dysfunction somewhere else.
it's foolish to say, well, here's the problem, without looking at everything else. So I think that's well played by you to show, hey, this gives us a glimpse of your overall health. These other areas need to be looked at in order to improve that area if we're going to do it right.
For sure. Well, and I just think it's such a big responsibility. And I've said this many times, I see people take more time, energy, and put more money away towards buying a house than they do when it comes to having a child. And then when we have the child, then we're so anxious and overwhelmed because we realize, at least that was my experience of like, oh my God, this is actually really hard work. And just because I'm built to do this doesn't mean that it's easy, And then once the child is out, well, now you're constantly worried, am I traumatizing my child because we know all this information? And the truth is, it's what I've come to peace with. Even the example that we use with the smacking the child, if she had 2 kids, one kid might be traumatized by that while the other one won't be, correct? Right? Because it depends on their
The
own little
individual,
program,
right.
individual, yeah, and what they perceive. And so one of my daughters might be traumatized by the fact that I didn't give her cereal one day, whereas the other one is going to not even think twice about it. And I don't have control of that.
No, that's exactly right.
But I can't teach her how to
It's all about
process it.
perspective, right? It's all
Yeah.
about perspective. And if we and I mentioned that about a trauma is also constriction. So
Yes.
what that means is if we have something occur to us and it makes us a lesser version, that persists as that lesser version of us after the event is over. So many times we can say, oh, that traumatized me. I watched that show and it traumatized me. It may have stressed you out. It might have given you a frightful experience. But for something to traumatize you, it makes you a lesser version of yourself afterwards. And that's one mark of it. And there's many other characteristics of it. It can hijack your internal GPS. Maybe you're an empath and you can sense things, but you can sense other people's energy and things like that. But if with certain loads of trauma, okay, everyone has different loads of trauma, it can make it to where you don't pick up on those empathic feelings correctly. They're all kind of coming in. Instead of being coherent, they're muffled. You don't trust your heart feelings. You don't listen to your gut feelings. You don't trust your intuition correctly, even though these things may be there and revved up and attempting to get your attention. It can give you an altered, it can basically hijack your GPS systems built in. Okay. So it can do a number of things to us. And it can also build perceptions that's why illness starts to come. Okay. There's many different reasons. It can build perceptions to where we try to compensate for those. If we did not feel loved as a child, it can make us do things to try to earn that love later in life, such as really putting emphasis on how attractive we are. You see this in people that are always doing gym selfies, without a doubt. The people that put a
Or
tremendous...
just the amount of work that like women obviously are getting done. I know men would, but it's just, I have never seen so much Botox, eyelashes, boob jobs, hair extensions. I'm just like floored of how much we've gone down that loop and how much we have accepted it as like, well, I just want to do this because it makes me feel X, Y, and Z.
Right. See, and they're looking for something on the external when there's something on the internal that's not quite right. Because any of those women, any women that has a breast enhancement therapy done, or they do the Botox or the lips or anything else, they would have a hard time saying they love themselves out loud, especially looking in a mirror at their own eyes. And what they're doing is they're compensating for that. Those compensating factors can become very stressful, because even though the person is doing something on the external, it will not fill the void on the inside. And that's what they're attempting to do, is fill some kind of void on the inside, something that was supposed to be good that didn't happen to them. They weren't accepted for who they were. They weren't cherished for who they were as an individual. Therefore, they have to work harder to do that. And sometimes these people become extremely nice. These are the people that are the people pleasers. These are the ones that can't say no when they should say no. These are the people that have a compulsive behavior to nurture the emotional needs of everyone around them while completely ignoring their own. That is a significant risk factor in nearly all cases of malignancy I've ever seen. Okay? They can't say no. They feel responsible for how other people feel. And why would they have this? When they come into the world, they have this need for connection. They have a need for connection. And if they don't get that connection during those crucial times, unknowingly, unwillingly, unconsciously, they will seek to try to build that connection any way they can. And they'll do it through trying to win the approval of people around them and putting themselves through great stresses as they're doing it. And through what's called psychoneuroimmunology, the brain centers that control our emotions also control our nervous system, our hormonal apparatus, and our immune system. So whenever we suppress part of ourself, whenever we don't speak our authentic self deep down, when we say yes, when we really say no, whenever we feel like I have to do this to be lovable, I have to do some kind of action to feel worthy, okay? There's a part of us that's telling us to kind of relax. There's a part of us telling us that we're okay how we are, but we push that down to try to overcompensate. And as we're pushing that down, we're also repressing our hormones. We're also repressing our immune system.
Sure, yeah.
And we're also repressing a lot of our nervous system function. And that's why people can become prone to chronic illnesses and things like that. That's where autoimmune comes in, because there's pushing down their emotional center. They're repressing their emotions or suppressing their emotions. And likewise, they're suppressing down those other systems at the same time.
Yeah, because you
And
can't suppress one without the other, right? It's just like the good and the bad with the emotional scale. You can't suppress the bad emotions and just feel the good ones. You kind of end up suppressing everything, and that's why you feel the flat.
that's exactly right. You can't suppress one without the other.
Yep.
And for every unit of energy that you keep buried down, it requires an equal, if not greater, amount of energy to keep it there. I worked with a woman twice now, and she's had chronic bladder pain that's been unresponsive to everything, including muscle testing, including parasite cleanses, including everything you could name, every kind of protocol and everything else. And her bladder pain continues to hurt. And the first thing I asked her was, are you pissed off at people? Do you have resentment? Are you holding on to old ideas? These are typical thought-cause alignment patterns with chronic bladder. Maybe, maybe not. I'm just kind of inquiring. And she said, yeah, I've got a lot of resentment towards my brother for certain things and my father for certain things. And it's funny you mentioned that, and I said, have you ever heard that before? And she said, no. And so we go in, we find the feeling related to the resentment. We go in, we find several memories of her and her brother. We do a batch release. We take every version of her that's ever felt resentment to a safe place, establish safety in all of them at once. She's watching this. I'm just kind of telling her how to do it, making sure that every past version of her feels safe. If you don't establish safety in every version of you who's ever felt powerless, it can still have power over you in some way, shape, or form. So we're doing a batch release, really powerful, shifting. And we come out of the session and I say, think of your brother, think of your father. I want you to feel some kind of resentment. I want you to be angry at them. I want you to be
Try
pissed
it.
off. And she just couldn't. She's laughing at it, saying, oh my gosh, there's nothing there. It's just a complete blank body feeling. That means the wound was healed. So I did a follow-up session with her. Actually, it was yesterday. And she said my bladder had flared up quite a bit. Is that normal? And I said, it can happen sometimes, sometimes, there's a part of you that still there, still remaining, something that needs to get looked at. But I just knew. I said, have you been wanting to cry and not letting yourself? And she goes, yeah, I went on vacation and I could just feel this stuff coming up and I buried it. And I said, okay, where'd you bury it? And she goes, down here. And I said, okay. And I said, I want you to just go get a pillow for me And I had her get into a mild altered state of consciousness, a little bit of trance. She grabbed this pillow. She screamed into this pillow for about 4 minutes, on
That's a
and
long
off and
time.
on and off, on and off and on and off. And I was, here's the thing, as she was doing it, I was encouraging her. This was
Of
through Zoom.
course.
I was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
get it out. I was like, you're going to feel much better when you get all this out. Get it all out. Get it all out. Afterwards, she was done. She could not feel any bladder pain. It went from a 7 out of 10 to instantly like a 0.5 from
Mhm.
screaming. So what that means is our work had worked, but
She didn't release the emotion.
there was sometimes a purging effect that has to occur.
Yeah.
And this work will cause that. If you go back and change your earliest perception of childhood, suddenly you give this, your past is alive inside of you and it influenced you. And most people have no idea of that until they experience it. But whenever you go back and you shift something, and the farther back you go in your memories, the more influence it has over your entire being. So we went back, changed it. She did the batch release and all that. But as a result of changing that, everyone's so different. Anything not in harmony with that change that we had just did was clearing itself out. And as that came up, she's been so used to burying her stuff that she just buried that, and it made her bladder flare up a bit. So I always tell people, if it's going to let it come up, let it come out, and once
Totally,
it came
yeah.
out, she was totally better. She still could not bring up resentment or anything, but there was just this need to cry, and she just didn't want to feel it. And
Sure.
that's because that repressed energy has to go somewhere. When we repress that stuff long enough, when we repress those emotions, and do you or your listeners know what I mean by suppressing and repressing?
I would love for you to clarify that, but because that was one of the questions. I'm like, how do you know you have suppressed or repressed emotions?
Okay. I was in Africa years ago, and there was a guide there, and he said, if you ever see a lion, a male lion running at you, don't run. 90% of those charges are mock charges, and the lion is just kind of testing you out. So I said, what do you do?
What a
Right.
test, right? What a test.
Well, I thought, what better example? There's other examples, but he said, stand, look at it, and hold your arms up. Hold your arms up in the air and look at it, and that will definitely be a test for him, because if it's a marked charge, 90% of the time it is, he's going to stop and go the other way. So at that moment, you are literally not feeling your fear. It's like if it's a dog and you say, don't let him smell your fear, you're kind of stuffing that down, okay? Stuffing down that fear to stand your ground, in this case of a lion charging. Another way of thinking about it is, if you've ever hugged somebody, had a neighbor or a friend or a family member that had a great loss occur, something really happened to their life, and they had some tragedy occur, and they came to you, and they needed some consolidation, and you were like, they're there, and you give them a hug, and you're holding them, and they're crying on your shoulder, and you're watching in the background, and yet you see something comical occur. Let's say you're watching a dog, and he slips and falls for a second, and he gets back up, and you're seeing this almost comical event occur that has nothing to do with your friend crying on your shoulder. Are you going to laugh? No.
You shouldn't.
You should not, right? You're going to bite your tongue and go, you're not going to allow yourself to laugh because the timing is inappropriate. That is what happens whenever we repress or suppress things. Suppressing means that we know we're doing it. Okay? It's a decision, like the lion, like hugging the person. We know that I shouldn't feel that right now. Let me bury it. Okay, that's suppressing. Repressing is when it's become so automatic that we don't allow ourselves. We always have a body feeling, but we just kind of stuff it away. All
It's
in
automatic.
an instant. It's automatic. But both of those are dangerous. In my next book I'm writing right now, I talk about, any munition expert will just tell you how you can completely alter the blast by changing the shape of the charge. Okay? So the example I give is this. If I took black powder and put it on the ground and burned it, the black powder would burn evenly, and no matter where you are in the room watching this, it would be a harmless event. But if I take that same black powder and I put it in a rifle casing shell and put a projectile on it and put it in a vise and hit the primer, the projectile will come out anywhere from 10 feet to 100 feet in just some random haphazard direction. You take the same amount of black powder, put it in a rifle casing, put it in a barrel now of a rifle, and it will shoot predictably 1.5 miles. Now, if you take the same black powder, the same rifle casing, put it in the same barrel, and cork it off, now you're going to have an explosion 100 times more violent than anything I've described so far, probably killing the shooter and anyone standing nearby. But what's important to recognize is the black powder amount had never changed. So whenever we repress feelings and we don't allow them to be expressed, we're basically capping off that energy. When we cap off that energy over time, it has to go somewhere. Whenever it goes inward, it creates autoimmune, malignancy, chronic pain, diseases, because that energy is going inward. It has to go somewhere. When it goes outward, we see things like domestic violence. We see things like violent crime. We see things, Marvin Haymeyer, a man who in Grunby, Colorado, I can't recall the name of the town. Marvin Haymeyer, if you just look up what's called Killdozer, there's a man who lost, he was in a court battle against a powerful family, and over and over, his muffler factory, he had a muffler repair shop, started losing ground to this powerful family. And he even goes inside and tape records himself saying, "You've pushed me to do this. I tried, but you pushed me to do this." And he armors up a bulldozer, puts a couple of rifles through it, in some areas. And he one day gets into that bulldozer and he drives over, destroys the mayor's house, destroys town hall. The cop cars were actually useless to do anything against him. And people can look at that and say, "Oh my gosh, it's so terrible, man. He lost it." That's just normal psyche, normal human psyche being pushed. Instead of him letting that stuff out somehow, some way, it built up and built up and built up and finally exploded outward.
For sure,
You
yeah.
know?
hmm It's
So,
fascinating. I mean, I know we're running out of time, but like, how do you know which questions to ask? And because even yesterday when we had our appointment, there was a couple phrases that you used that are really powerful. And I think when we're listening to content like this, we're kind of like, we're just trying to consume it and I'm trying to, make sense of it. And I have to take a couple days to let my body process it. But when you get me to say things out loud, there's almost this immediate feedback that you get of like, huh, that's interesting. I've never said this sentence before. Or when I say it, I can feel that it doesn't sync with my body. Like it doesn't feel true, you know? So how do you
right.
know which sentences to add? Is this just like experience over time? Is there intuition that's involved? Obviously, lots of your education, I'm assuming.
I'd say a little bit of all that, okay? A little bit of all that, just working with people. But what I'm essentially doing, and in my book, From Pain to Purpose, the intention was to give this to people, this technology access for people that maybe can't afford my services or not available, things like that, but still give them a way to understand themselves better. And so what I did was I wrote self-image list, like a self-image construct. And what it is, it's a way of learning something about yourself. But in order to do this, you're going to have to go from level 1, understanding of consciousness, to level 2. Level 2 is where you start to realize, hey, there's two minds within me. There's a conscious and subconscious mind. And although I may have heard that term before, and the
I haven't
psychologist and
experienced it.
I haven't experienced it. The psychiatric doctor or the psychologist doctor, tells me my subconscious is the id, the ego. It's the part of me that runs my heart rate. It's the part of me that digests food and all that. And we get that. There's another part of the subconscious that's a universal mind. It's connected to every single particle in the universe. That's where you can sense things. Telepathic abilities, for example, are 5 times more scientifically validated than an aspirin preventing a heart attack. They're 5 times, has 5 times more of an impact than that. Yet everyone's heard of an aspirin, taking an aspirin for a heart attack. And if you say the word telepathic, they automatically go, well, that can't be accurate. It's actually more validated 5 times scientifically because of this universal connection we all have. If you've never heard of remote viewing, there's an organization, I've studied it, and I can even teach people that. Remote viewing is where you are actually able to perceive things over great distances and perceive them real and sense things going on, just because of the vast universal mind we have, that connection. There's a company I know of that the U.S. government hired a couple of remote viewers, and they could pinpoint missiles in Iran, they could pinpoint prisoners in Iraq, and they found them with stunning accuracy. So, of course, this is well known and researched and all that. And that all has to do with the subconscious mind, every bit of it. So, whenever I'm trying to find something that is something you don't like, and we don't know where it's at, and the only source that knows is your subconscious mind, we have to provoke it. Now, in my book, I talk about this self-image list, and I list off some phrases that say, you're worthless. You'll never amount to anything. You're unlovable. Nobody will ever love you. And what those phrases are doing are giving you data. That's it. Not insulting. It's just giving you data. And as you hear those words, if there's a ping inside of your body, a vibrational, a trigger, but you feel this body feeling show up, that is because those words have some kind of resonance to something within you. And that's what needs to be cleared out. It has nothing to do with your interpretation or the emotions or he's insulting me. None of that. It has to do with some kind of little ping. And what I do is look for those pings. I look for those things. And once we clear those out, the wound is healed. All the emotional cascade that comes with it is healed as well. And the chance for a retrigger and the chance for it to affect our brainwaves and our physiological states is mathematically zeroed out. I was invited to give a presentation for some big names last week, and this was for wealth building. I know my forte is definitely psychosomatic medicine, which is helping people with unresponsive physiological illnesses, mystery illnesses of all kinds where nothing else has worked, that have at its root cause repressed emotions. But I also do a lot of performance enhancing too. People that have blind spots that are wanting to go to another step.
For sure, yeah.
So that was the case for this group. They wanted me to talk to a group of people to help them, and because they're doing this big group, and a lot of them are millionaires, and they want to get to the next level, and some of them are thriving millionaires. And so I was invited to speak to this group last weekend. Yeah. And so I sat down through Zoom and I said this: I want everyone in this room to pay attention how you feel. And this is similar to what I would do for a client. It's no different. Maybe the context is different, but it's the same thing. And they, of course, have all heard of the subconscious mind, and many of them had worked on it, but there was still something that they were inviting me to go deeper with. And I said, I want you all to pay attention to how these statements make you feel. I want you to say out loud, money flows to me easily and I spend it wisely. I want you to say it out loud and I want you to believe it. And then I want you to say, as you say that out loud, notice as you say it, there's some little feeling that shows up. As you say it, it feels good, and then you notice this little icky, nagging feeling in the background. And that nagging feeling, although it may be faint, is your dominant thought. That's your dominant thought. That's the thing the universe is responding to, because we live in a waveform, vibrational universe, and we can say these things and we can want these things. You know, I'm a millionaire right now. I earn $1 million this year. And you're saying that, and this little ping shows up in the background. Well, that ping is a vibrational signature that the universe responds to far more than your voice.
Because it's that millisecond in your nervous system that has basically been captured in the subconscious and creating life as you know it.
Somewhere you learned that either, and here's where the interpretation, I always tell people, if you want to mess up a good session, I had class with my PhD students yesterday. I said, look, if you want to mess up a good healing session with any client, you go in there assuming you know what's going to be the problem. You never know. You never know. They're subconscious. And like you called this, you said root cause. This is like root cause medicine. It's very true. I always have people, they have no idea what is causing their problem, and I don't either. And I never pretend to even know. I just know this. There's only one source that knows. Let's find out what it is. Let your subconscious take us
Yeah, let's
there.
make it feel
Okay.
safe and let's ask some provoking questions. And because you've been doing it for so long, you know exactly what questions to ask. And when the mind tries to get away from you, you know how to pin it.
I know how to, well, it's not pin it, but I know if we're going where we need to
Yes.
go, if not, because you can't force it to do anything, right? I had a
It's
woman,
like a toddler,
oh,
right?
this might be a little, it's like a toddler, right? With the power of the Milky Way galaxy behind it and the playfulness of a toddler, right? Where our stoic intellectual mind is the power of like an automobile engine compared to the Milky Way galaxy. That's the two. Um, but I had but you just never know where the source of that's going to come from. This might be a little vulgar, but I think it's appropriate to share. I had a woman in Moscow, Russia once, and I maybe told you this,
Hmm.
contact me, and she said that she had high blood pressure, she had really bad heart palpitations, she had all kinds of stomach acid problems, GERD and everything else, and she had done as much as she could, and she contacts me, and I'm talking to her about this, and she goes, it's my ex-husband. I had a really, really bad marriage with him. It was abusive, and I got away, and I've lived away from him for a year now, but all these problems still come up, and I'm still just terrified of the man. I think of his face at night when I'm trying to sleep. And she flat out said, Gabe, I want you to nuke the memories of him. Okay? And I said, okay, well, I said, when you think about him, you think about your ex-husband, you think about all the problems it's causing you. I want you to notice a body feeling you have, a feeling you don't like. Take us all the way back to the very first time you had that feeling. And suddenly she's 6 months old and it's in a complete blur. Everything about the room is in a complete blur, almost like you're underwater with your eyes open with no goggles, you know? And I'm asking her some questions and she really can't answer them. Like, are you inside a building? You know, are you alone with people? Is the room temperature cool or warm? Are you able to tell any of that? And she says no, but she knew she was 6 months. And I said, is your mind keeping you from something? Is your mind blocking you from something? She goes, yeah, it is. Because your unconscious mind, your subconscious always answers first. It always answers correctly. And I said, are you willing and allowing to let yourself be revealed whatever is going on in this moment so you can get free from it? And she said, yes. I did a little count back and I said to her subconscious mind, like a dimmer switch getting brighter, like a volume switch getting louder, you're revealing all the details we need to know in this moment for her to get free of it. As we did that, she realized that she's 6 months old on her father's shoulder and her father is actually masturbating. And although it sounds horrible, it had nothing to do with her ex-husband at all. It had to do with this moment. And she starts crying and getting frustrated, and I let her take it all out. I let her be as ugly as she needed to be. Then we batched the whole thing in some serious forgiveness. Okay? And at her next appointment, her heart palpitations were gone. Her digestion had vastly improved, and her blood pressure had normalized.
No memory of her husband.
And here's the thing, after the appointment, because whatever she brought to me, she goes, can you nuke the memories of my husband? I said, I can't nuke them because that'd be like me taking a time machine and acting it where you just never met your husband. I can't do that. Like Gabor says, he says, trauma is not what happened to you, it's what happened inside you. That is what I can help you with. Whatever it's encoded, how it's been encoded is what I can help you do. I can't change your past, but I can change the way your mind body is giving meaning to that past. Okay? And I've often thought about Gabor. I've often thought, man, if he could just sit through some of my work, because I know that he's still hurting from his past, you know, and he's been just a ball of wisdom. I've learned so much
Yep.
from studying him,
I've seen a
right?
big shift of him with him since he talked about that ayahuasca. I don't know if you've seen him on Joe Rogan
I
talk about
have.
his ayahuasca trip. And because I met him in person when I was in Vancouver and he did, you know, some trauma work. I remember I came to one of his talks and I could see this heaviness and it was palpable and it's very different now. And I'm sure there's obviously, you know, we only get to see a little bit of the person. But I noticed a change in him since he's gotten some more work. Like it's just, there's a lightness, you know?
So what'd that ayahuasca do?
I mean, it brought him to God. That's what it did.
Exactly.
It's,
Here's the thing. Here's the thing. Exactly. And here's the thing. We all have a piece of God in us,
yes.
and we lose that with that initial sensitizing event. And that's what my work does without the ayahuasca.
Yeah.
Is it takes you back to that first seed planting where you first went from fresh from God, fresh from divine. I've studied 300 near-death experiences, and I've interviewed people, and their characteristics of what happens when we leave the physical body is phenomenally similar.
Yes.
So what happens, if that's what happens when we leave the physical body, what happens whenever we come into this form? Well, whenever we come into this form at conception, we go from pure consciousness, infinite, pure consciousness, to a single cell. That's what happened.
Yeah.
That's the only thing.
Yeah.
And yet, all we still know at that moment is divine, God, bliss, peace, zero burden. That's all we come into this world knowing, the good of God at conception. And yet we have no perceptions of mankind until we have that first taste of humanity. And that first taste of humanity is oftentimes, oh, I'm pregnant. Oh, this can't be, not right now. And that becomes our very first, what I call pie in the face. When we're fresh from God, when we're fresh from the divine, from pure light, pure harmony, pure everything, to suddenly this pie comes out of nowhere and smacks us in the face. And we hear Bruce Willis's voice sing, "Hey, welcome to the party, pal. Life's not such a bowl of cherries here, is it?" And that becomes our perception, right?
Totally.
Ayahuasca gets your mind out of the way.
For sure.
It
I mean,
gets
any
your rational
psychedelics,
mind.
right?
Altered state
Most.
of consciousness. That's what psychedelics do. But anything that's going to do any kind of meaningful change work to a person has to do with what's called altered state of consciousness. And that's basically a trance state. That what's unique about holographic manipulation therapy is we don't get your conscious mind out of the way. So people ask, is it hypnosis? Here's the thing. Hypnosis is a label. Hypnosis is just a label. Everything is hypnosis today. All the media, everything.
Totally.
So hypnosis is,
Whether you know it or not, you're hypnotized.
every preacher is a hypnosis.
Yeah.
Okay? Every person that can alter, every actor is the best hypnotherapist on the world, on the planet. Actors on TVs that can get into emotional states, take you out of your world and bring you into theirs.
Yes.
That is hypnosis. That is all hypnosis, okay? So is it hypnosis? Yes and no. It's not traditional hypnosis. I use that anchoring into safety, but then I use something different to access that. And the part that's different is hypnosis makes your critical conscious mind, it moves it out of the way and it talks to the subconscious. In this work, we use your conscious mind, we use what's called your critical faculty, and we use your subconscious all together. So there's a lot more meaningful change. We use all parts of your mind, not just turning some of them off to talk to the deeper parts. So that's where it's different. And all levels of holographic manipulation therapy, you're there, you're able to make decisions, but it can be compared to an ayahuasca trip, but without the, you're anchored in the safety. Many times with people that do ayahuasca, it's grown so fast that I believe the professional level of handling it is not quite there yet. So it can be a real hit or miss. You can get with somebody that is meaningful, but they don't know the right things, and it might not be helpful for you.
Yeah, and my biggest pet peeve is when we say natural medicine didn't work or this didn't, because usually you just missed pieces somewhere. You did something before the body was actually ready, or you didn't have the right support tool integration after.
Right, because natural stuff does work.
Of course, that's why we're here.
That's why we're here, right? And
yeah, that's how we're all here. Yeah, tell us what's a good way, I know you talked about your book, what's a good way to get people started in this kind of work? To read your book?
Okay, if you want to know more about myself, thesubconscioushealer.com. It's my website, and there you'll see my book pop right up as a good way to order that. If you order that through Amazon or whatever else, and you let us know you ordered it, you get a bonus where you get video content free with the book, to purchase the book, that shows you how to do these techniques that are in the book. So you have some video instructions, not just it written out, for how to start to access this party. How do you anchor stuff into safety first off? How to
Hmm.
do some holographic deletions with interface, which are really powerful, and how to reframe certain perceptions. So you can get a taste of this on your own, and these techniques are very, very powerful. I see them shift things all the time. The feedback from my book has been absolutely outstanding from people that never heard of me, people in Australia, people all over the world that are reading this and doing this, and understanding as you read the book, you realize that you're non-physical. You realize that you're made of
Yeah,
quantum particles. I go into a lot of science explaining how non-physical you are. So by the time you get to the techniques, they make complete sense.
for
If
sure.
you, like most people, just jump to the techniques and you have a stoic understanding of this flesh body that we live in, it might not be as helpful as the information in there kind of preps you for it. So the subconscioushealer.com is our website. The book is called From Pain to Purpose, a complete guide on how to reverse PTSD using holographic theory. And then an email just to contact us would be elevateyourfield at pm as in Paul Mike .me as in Mike Echo. So
Amazing. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Gabe Roberts, a subconscious healer. I'm really excited to work with you. I'm excited to be spreading this message because I am all for root medicine, and I think a lot of and maybe this is just the way that my belief system is working right now. It's easier to get into the physical body and to start helping people feel better, but they're going to come to a point where that's not going to be enough. And so we have to look at the mental and emotional, and the more that we can have these conversations, the more it makes it less uncomfortable to even talk about these things, and then kind of gets rid of the fear that, like, oh my God, now I'm going to have to talk about all of my childhood trauma and deal with it. Where in reality, there's incredible people, amazing techniques that are really simple that can take you to the place where you need to go and just help you resolve it, like have an actual guide to do it instead of thinking that you have to do it on your own. But I think starting with reading a book is a great place to start, because that's how you're going to get it into your subconscious. And then one day you're going to say, hey, maybe this is something that I need to do now. And maybe that day's today, but maybe it's a month from now or a year from now. But
right,
we're getting there. We're getting there as a society, I think.
absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Gabe, for being here. I appreciate you.
Well, thank you. This has been a pleasure, Jane.